What happens when the person who runs an empire can't see the one holding it together for years? Claire Bennett arrived at Ashford Vineyards before dawn, her steps quiet across the stone floors. She kept the calendars, solved the crises, and carried the weight of silence with grace. To most, she was background efficient, reliable, invisible. To her boss, Grant Ashford, she was useful, but never truly seen. Then came one careless remark, not shouted, not cruel, just dismissive enough to cut deeper than anger. That night, Claire realized invisibility had stopped being her shield. It had become her cage. From the vineyards of Napa to the pools of Calistoga, her journey unfolded not with fireworks but with small, steady choices, a morning walk, a page in a journal, a voice offered when it mattered. And one day, she stood where no one expected, fully visible, undeniable. But when the arrogant man who once laughed at her looks finally saw the woman he had overlooked, the question was no longer about him. It was about her choice. Would she forgive and stay, or walk forward on her own terms? If this story touches something in you, hit like, share it with a friend, and subscribe for more tales of quiet strength and second chances. How long has it been since you did everything on time, to every standard, to every expectation, and still felt invisible? In Napa Valley, there was a woman who knew that feeling in the quiet rhythm of her every step. Claire Bennett's alarm clock rang at 5:30 a.m., though she rarely needed it. Her body had grown so used to the routine that she often stirred awake a few minutes earlier, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional car passing on the road outside her modest apartment in St. Helena. She rose without hesitation, feet slipping into the same worn slippers, hand brushing against the cool counter as she brewed a pot of coffee she would barely drink. By 6, she was on the road. The valley was still hushed at that hour, the fog draped low across the rows of vines like a blanket no one dared disturb. She liked that hour best, when the air smelled faintly of damp earth and oak barrels from nearby wineries, and the sky was only beginning to pale. She drove with the windows slightly cracked, letting the crisp air fill her lungs, hoping it might carry some sense of renewal into a day that would otherwise unfold in the exact same way as the one before. She parked in her usual spot, far enough from the main entrance that her car never drew attention. The building of Ashford Vineyards and Estates loomed ahead, its facade of pale stone and tall glass standing as proudly as the brand it represented. At 7:25 sharp, Claire's heels clicked softly against the stone path that led to the door. Just minutes before the staff entrance was unlocked. She was always first, always prepared, always unseen. Her desk on the executive floor was immaculate, not because anyone told her to keep it that way, but because order steadied her. Every pen lined up, every folder labeled, every reminder sticky note tucked just out of sight. She was efficient, yes, but never loud about it. She preferred muted tones in her clothing: gray slacks, navy cardigans, soft beige blouses. Her hair was drawn back neatly in a low knot, her perfume non-existent. She lived by a quiet code: do not invite notice, do not draw fire, and it worked. For years it worked. At 36, Claire had perfected the art of being indispensable without ever stepping into the spotlight. She answered emails before most people had poured their first cup of coffee. She organized meetings so seamlessly that executives barely realized how many moving parts she held together. She was the silent bridge between competing calendars, the one who remembered dietary restrictions for catered lunches, the one who made sure the CEO never sat in traffic before a critical investor call. But, to most eyes, she was simply part of the furniture. Grant Ashford, the man she worked for directly, embodied that truth more than anyone. At 45, he carried himself with the kind of authority that made people straighten their posture when he walked into a room. His suits were custom, his shoes polished, his schedule tightly guarded. He had inherited the vineyard from his father 2 decades earlier, grown it into a premier estate known not only for its wines, but also for its hospitality business. His reputation was as much about precision as it was about taste. Widowed in his late 30s, Grant had channeled his grief into work, or at least, that was what people whispered when they dared speak of his personal life. He didn't gossip, didn't flirt, didn't tolerate excuses. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He set standards by the way he lived, and everyone else either met them or quietly disappeared from his orbit. Claire had been in his orbit for 4 years now. She had memorized the details that made his world move without friction. His coffee order black, no sugar. His dislike of serif fonts in presentations. The fact that he couldn't stand the smell of strong perfume in a meeting room. She knew how his jaw tightened when he was under stress, how his pen tapped against the table when he was waiting for someone to finish speaking. She knew all this, yet he knew almost nothing about her. To him, she was reliable, neutral, efficient. He spoke to her in clipped phrases. Confirm this, reschedule that. Draft the notes and rarely looked directly at her when he did. If he passed her in the hallway, he acknowledged her presence with the same attention he gave to the glass doors or the polished marble floors. He relied on her, but he did not see her. It was, in a strange way, what Claire had once wanted. After a breakup in her early 30s that left her raw and wary, invisibility had felt like safety. She wanted no wandering eyes on her, no judgment about her style, no whispers about her personal life. If blending into the background meant peace, she embraced it. But peace, when stretched too long, begins to resemble a cage. There were moments, small ones, when she felt the weight of it pressing in, when she saw her reflection in the darkened surface of her computer monitor and barely recognized herself, when she walked past colleagues laughing together in the break room and felt like a ghost, when she sat at her tidy desk long after everyone else had gone home, typing up notes that no one would remember she had written. The company thrived, the vineyard flourished, events sparkled under chandeliers. Yet Claire's life felt muted, as if she were moving through it on tiptoe. That morning, as she set down Grant's schedule for the day, a lunch with distributors, a tasting with international buyers, a late afternoon call with investors, she smoothed the papers with careful precision. Her hands were steady, but her chest carried the familiar heaviness. Another day, another routine, another round of being useful but unseen. She sat back, folding her hands in her lap, and let her gaze drift toward the wide windows overlooking the rolling hills of Napa. The vines stretched endlessly, a sea of green leaves turning with the season, sunlight beginning to spill through the fog. It was beautiful, breathtaking even, but she felt no part of it. She might as well have been watching a painting behind glass. And so began another ordinary day at Ashford Vineyards and Estates, a day that would look like every day before it, at least for now, because even the most ordinary days have cracks waiting to appear. And when they do, everything that seemed unshakable can begin to tremble. There are words you cannot take to court, words no HR policy will punish, yet they can silence a person for half a lifetime. The quarterly review had stretched long into the late morning. The boardroom smelled faintly of coffee gone cold and paper freshly printed. PowerPoint slides clicked past in their orderly rhythm, filled with revenue charts and vineyard expansion plans. By the time the meeting wrapped up, people were restless, voices hushed as chairs scraped back from the long mahogany table. Claire gathered her notes quickly, as she always did, sliding her tablet into its leather cover. She waited near the back, ready to collect stray papers left behind, to reset the room before the next gathering. Her role was to fade into the background, to make transition seamless. Grant stood near the head of the table with the chief financial officer, a tall man with sharp glasses and an even sharper tongue. Their conversation carried across the quiet room once most had filed out. Claire was still close enough to hear, though they did not register her presence. The CFO asked something about staffing, about the new hires and marketing. Grant's reply came low, casual, almost amused. "At least I don't have to worry about Claire being a distraction," he said, his voice edged with a dry laugh. "She's plain enough, efficient, steady, invisible. That's probably why she's lasted this long." The words landed without warning, not shouted, not cruel in tone, but delivered like an offhand observation. No malice, no hesitation, just a fact in his mind. Claire froze. Her back remained straight, her face composed. She bent to pick up a stray pen, as though nothing unusual had been said. But inside, a sharp sting spread through her chest. It wasn't the first time she had felt unseen, but it was the first time the truth of it had been spoken out loud by the very man whose world she held together. Invisible. That was the word. She did not let her eyes flicker, did not let her breath quicken. Years of practice had taught her how to hold still when wounded. She slipped the pen into her folder, closed the cover with calm fingers, and walked out of the room as though she hadn't heard a thing. Behind her, the conversation continued, voices lowering into figures and forecasts. Neither man noticed her leave. The afternoon passed in its usual blur. Emails, calls, a delivery to sign for, a last-minute correction on a distributor's contract. Claire's hands performed their tasks on autopilot, but her mind carried the echo of those words like a bell that refused to stop ringing. Not pretty enough to distract, efficient, steady, invisible. They weren't insults, not technically. She could not report them, could not print them out as evidence of bias. They were simply dismissals, dismissals of her as a woman, as a human being beyond the utility she provided. The office carried on in its polished rhythm. Executives laughed at private jokes in the break room. Assistants compared weekend plans near the elevators. No one looked at her differently. No one knew what had been said. The veneer of professionalism remained intact, as flawless as the vineyard lawns trimmed outside. But inside Claire, something small cracked. By the time evening came, she was back in her apartment. She set her keys on the counter, her bag on the chair, and slipped off her shoes with the same quiet precision she carried everywhere. The rooms were silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. She reheated leftovers she barely tasted, sitting at her small wooden table with the overhead light buzzing faintly. She tried to focus on her meal, on the emails she could finish before bed, on the book she had left half-read on the sofa, but the words returned, uninvited, invisible, plain enough. That's why she lasted. Her fork clinked softly against the plate. She put it down, appetite gone. She sat very still, staring at the wall where shadows from the streetlight cut across her bookshelf. Her throat tightened, though she did not cry. Not yet. Instead, she listened to the refrigerator hum, to the faint tick of the clock above the stove, to the emptiness that pressed in, heavier than it had the night before. Every ordinary sound felt amplified, as though the world was reminding her of its indifference. She leaned back, closed her eyes, and for the first time allowed herself to whisper a question she had never dared shape into words. If I disappeared tomorrow, would anyone notice the thought lodged deep, refusing to let go? It followed her into the shower, into the folding of laundry, into the moment she slid under the covers. Even as she stared at the ceiling in the dark, the question pulsed like a heartbeat she could not still, and beneath it, another truth stirred quiet, unwelcome but persistent. Maybe the greater wound was not that Grant had said it. Maybe it was that a part of her had already believed it. The night stretched long, the silence deeper than usual. When she finally drifted into sleep, the words clung like vines around her chest, pulling her down into dreams she would not remember, only the heaviness they left behind. Tomorrow would come, another day of order, another day of precision. But the cut had been made, clean and quiet, and cuts like that never heal the same way. When no one grants you the right to exist, will you dare to write your own name into the story? That night, long after the office lights had dimmed and the city had gone quiet, Claire sat at her kitchen table with a notebook open before her. She had pulled it from the back of a drawer, where it had been hidden under old tax forms and appliance manuals. The pages smelled faintly of dust and disuse. She uncapped a pen, hesitated, then began to write. She wrote down the words she had overheard that day. Invisible, plain, efficient, steady, not pretty enough to distract. She wrote them in sharp letters, as though carving them into the paper would stop them from circling in her head. Then she paused. The ink glistened under the overhead light, black against the cream-colored page. On the next line, She began to list the things no one noticed but depended on. The flight rescheduled at midnight so the CEO wouldn't miss a meeting. The dietary notes that prevented a guest from having an allergic reaction at a dinner. The careful timing of deliveries so the lobby wouldn't be cluttered when investors arrived. The flowers sent to a board member's spouse after surgery, signed in Grant's name. She filled line after line, each detail small, almost invisible, but together they formed the scaffolding that held an empire upright. She realized she was recording proof not for anyone else, but for herself. Proof that she was more than the offhand comment that had sliced through her earlier that day. Her hand slowed as the page filled. The silence of her apartment pressed in, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the distant bark of a neighbor's dog. She set down her pen, rubbed her temples, and stared at the words she had written. For the first time in years, she let herself wonder if maybe invisibility had stopped being protection and had become something else. A habit, a weight, a prison she had built herself. The thought unsettled her enough that she reached for her phone. Her cousin Maggie picked up on the third ring, her voice warm and scratchy with fatigue. "Claire, is everything okay?" Claire tried to sound casual, but the pause between her words gave her away. "I just needed to hear someone who remembers me." There was quiet on the other end, the kind of silence Maggie had always been good at keeping patient, steady, waiting. "Finally," Claire whispered. "He said I've lasted because I'm not a distraction. Because I'm plain." Her voice broke slightly. "And the worst part is, it felt true." Maggie exhaled slowly, and Claire could almost picture her cousin leaning back against her kitchen counter in Idaho, coffee mug in hand, eyes soft with concern. "Claire," she said gently, "you don't owe anyone invisibility. Not him, not your job, not the world. That isn't respect. That's erasure." Claire closed her eyes. The words landed heavy, yet they cracked something open too. "You've carried yourself with dignity," Maggie continued. "But dignity isn't the same as silence. You've been shrinking to fit someone else's frame, and that isn't living. You deserve to take up space not because of how you look, but because of who you are." Claire's throat tightened. "But how do I even start?" Maggie's reply came without hesitation. "Start small. Do one thing tomorrow that says, 'I am here.' Just for yourself. No one else has to know. But you'll know." The call ended after a while, but the words lingered like the aftertaste of strong tea, bitter at first, but warming as they settled. Claire sat in the quiet, her pen resting against the open page of her notebook. She reread the lists she had made, the dismissive words on one side, the unseen contributions on the other, and she realized something. She couldn't control whether others saw her, but she could choose whether she would continue to erase herself. She flipped to a fresh page and wrote a new list. Drink water before coffee, walk for 10 minutes after waking, stretch shoulders at her desk, read one article on internal communications, write one honest sentence in her journal each night. The goals were small, almost laughably so, but they were hers, each one a seed she could plant in soil long neglected. When she set down the pen, she felt different, not lighter, not yet, but steadier, as though she had finally placed her hand on a rope in the dark. She closed the notebook carefully, slid it onto the nightstand, and prepared for bed. The apartment was still quiet, the hum of the refrigerator unchanged, but she no longer felt swallowed by the silence. Tomorrow would come, as it always did. The meetings, the schedules, the steady march of hours. But this time, she would carry something new into the day, a small, deliberate choice to stop hiding from herself. And it would begin not with a grand declaration, not with anyone else's approval, but with one tiny act of presence. In the morning, she would start with something very small, so small no one else might notice. But she would, and that would be enough. Change rarely arrives with thunder. It begins quietly with a glass of water, a pair of walking shoes, and one deliberate breath. The next morning, Claire rose at the same early hour, but instead of heading straight for the coffee pot, she reached for a glass from the cupboard, filled it with cold water, and drank it slowly. The taste was simple, clean, almost bland. Yet the act itself felt oddly powerful, as if she had chosen presence over autopilot. Afterward, she laced up an old pair of sneakers, their soles worn from years of neglect, and stepped outside. The air was brisk, carrying the faint sweetness of ripening grapes. Fog clung to the rows of vines, softening the landscape into something dreamlike. She started down the narrow dirt path between the vineyards, her steps tentative at first. Her body protested. Muscles in her calves ached, and her breath came quicker than she expected. She had not realized how long it had been since she moved with intention rather than rushing from desk to car to bed. Still, she kept going, counting her steps in groups of 10, willing herself past the first stretch of resistance. Soon, the rhythm steadied, the sound of gravel beneath her shoes blended with the rustle of leaves overhead. Birds stirred in the branches, their calls slicing through the morning hush. Claire inhaled deeply, the cool air filling her lungs, and for the first time in a long time, she felt awake not just in mind, but in body. By the time she returned to her apartment, her cheeks were flushed, her heart steady but alive. She stood for a moment at the door, listening to the thrum of her pulse, and smiled faintly. It was small, but it was hers. Inside. She stretched for 10 minutes, rolling her shoulders, loosening her neck, lifting her arms overhead until the joints cracked softly. These were movements she had once dismissed as trivial, but today they felt like care. She noticed how her back straightened, how her breathing slowed. At her desk later, she caught herself slumping and adjusted, feet planted firmly, spine lifted, a tiny correction, but it shifted how she felt in her own skin. The rest of the day unfolded as usual, emails, schedules, meetings. But woven into the routine was a quiet thread of change. She paused to drink water before pouring coffee. She stood and stretched after an hour of typing. No one around her noticed. Yet each act reminded her that she was not merely a machine serving others' demands. That evening, instead of numbing herself with television, Claire opened her laptop and typed a new search: internal communications best practices. The screen filled with articles and online courses. She clicked on one about storytelling in corporate culture. The instructor's voice played steady and clear, explaining how stories shape belonging, how messages framed with empathy resonate longer than charts and numbers. Claire took notes in her neat, compact handwriting. She underlined words like clarity, connection, voice. She imagined what it would look like to weave those principles into her weekly summaries, to make the dry reports she prepared breathe with meaning. The next day, she tried. Instead of sending Grant a plain bullet list of action items, she structured her email like a narrative: what had been accomplished, what challenge lay ahead, what choice the team now faced. It was still professional, still precise, but carried a thread of story. She hit send with a nervous flutter, then sat back, waiting. No reply came. That was normal, but she knew the difference. She had placed something of herself into the work. Later that week, on her way home, Claire stopped at the small pharmacy on Main Street. She wandered the aisles aimlessly until her eyes fell on a row of lipsticks. Most were shades she had never dared to wear: bright corals, deep reds. But one caught her eye: rosewood, subtle yet warm, the color of autumn leaves holding on just before winter. She picked it up, turning the tube in her hand. For a moment, she almost laughed at herself. What did a tube of lipstick matter? But Maggie's words echoed in her head: do one thing that says, "I am here." So she bought it, not to wear to work, not yet. She slipped it into her bag as a promise, a quiet reminder waiting for the day she was ready. That night, she stood in front of her bathroom mirror, uncapped the lipstick, and pressed it to her lips. The reflection staring back startled her. She didn't look transformed, not suddenly glamorous or new, but she looked seen by herself. She smiled, faint but real. Over the next days, these habits held: 10 minutes of stretching, water before coffee. Walks when the morning fog lingered, notes from an online course scribbled in the margins of her planner, each action small enough to slip unnoticed by the world, But together they formed a quiet rebellion. Change, she realized, did not need applause, it needed persistence. And in the stillness of her apartment, as she washed her face and set the rosewood lipstick back in its box, she caught her own eyes in the mirror. For the first time in years, she didn't look past herself. She looked directly, and she recognized a spark, the kind of spark that begins not with others' approval, but with a whisper, "I choose me." And tomorrow, she would wake again, lace her shoes, and plant another seed. You don't need to be loud to be heard. When the strength is steady inside you, the voice finds its own clarity. The changes came quietly, woven into Claire's days like a thread no one else noticed at first. She stood before her closet one Saturday morning, hands brushing across the familiar palette of grays and blues. For years she had chosen what was safe fabrics that didn't wrinkle, cuts that didn't draw the eye, tones that let her vanish in any crowd. This time, she paused. Her hand lingered on a blouse in soft cream, one she had bought long ago but never worn. Next to it hung a cardigan in muted rose. She tried them on, surprised at how the fabric felt against her skin, gentle, forgiving. A warmth she hadn't realized she craved. The mirror reflected someone still modest, still professional, but touched with life. She began to make small adjustments. A necklace of brushed gold, not flashy but noticeable when she tilted her head. Shoes with a softer curve at the toe, colors that carried warmth without shouting. Each choice was deliberate, not to invite approval, but to remind herself she was more than function. At work, she carried those choices like armor turned inside out, not a shield against the world, but a whisper to herself, "I am here." Her emails changed too. She had been practicing conciseness, learning from her late-night courses on communication. She trimmed extra words, cut the clutter, highlighted what mattered. Then one morning, she wrote a brief note suggesting a slight change in the way approvals for high-level meetings were routed. Nothing grand, just one step fewer, one signature less, a smoother flow. She sent it and thought little more of it. A week later, she overheard a project manager remark how much faster scheduling had become. Executives no longer missed key slots, and meetings aligned with fewer conflicts. The ripple had begun with her suggestion, small but real. Claire said nothing, but inside, a quiet current stirred. In the next internal meeting, seated at the long table among other assistants and department coordinators, she found herself listening to a debate drag on too long. Voices circled, repeating the same points. She felt the familiar urge to stay silent, to let it pass. Then she remembered Maggie's words, "Do one thing that says, 'I am here,' so," without raising her hand, without waiting for permission, she spoke. "If we batch approvals weekly instead of daily, it may cut the bottleneck." Her voice was steady, clear. The room paused, heads turned. The department lead nodded slowly. "That makes sense." The conversation moved forward, built on her suggestion, and the meeting ended 20 minutes sooner than usual. Claire packed her notebook calmly, but her hands trembled faintly. She had spoken, and no one dismissed her. The world hadn't cracked open, the ceiling hadn't fallen, but something inside her shifted, as if a locked door had given way. Later that week, Olivia Morton, one of the board's senior advisors, approached her by the coffee station. Olivia was in her early 60s, her silver hair always pinned neatly, her voice carrying the patience of someone who had seen decades of industry's change. She smiled at Claire. "You've been carrying yourself differently lately, not louder, just clearer." Claire blinked, unsure what to say. Compliments were rare, especially ones that noticed more than surface. Olivia continued, "It isn't the blouse or the shoes. It's something else. Substance. Keep at it." She touched Claire's arm briefly, then moved on. The words lingered, not because they were flowery, but because they affirmed what Claire had been trying to build presence without asking permission. That evening, Claire opened her closet again. She looked at the muted rows of gray and beige, then at the few new additions she had dared to place among them. She didn't plan to reinvent herself overnight, but she felt the quiet power of knowing she could choose. When she sat at her desk the next day, She lifted her chin just slightly higher. She answered emails with precision, but allowed her words to carry tone, not just function. She spoke when necessary, and each time, the silence after felt less heavy. By the end of the week, an email arrived in her inbox. Company retreat, Calistoga, hot springs and pool. 3 days of workshops, strategy sessions, and relaxation by the water. All executive staff and their assistants expected to attend. Claire stared at the screen. In years past, she would have clicked decline without hesitation, preferring the safety of her apartment over the exposure of mingling. But this time, she hesitated only long enough to take a slow breath. Then she clicked attending. The confirmation appeared in neat letters. She leaned back in her chair, letting the decision settle into her chest. Not heavy, not frightening, steady. Change was no longer only in the glass of water, the morning walk, the stretch of her shoulders. Change was here, in the way she chose to stand among others. And in Calistoga, she would stand. Some places are built for healing, but sometimes a single weekend can tilt the course of an entire life. The bus ride from Napa to Calistoga wound through golden hills, past vineyards heavy with fruit and olive trees catching the morning light. Claire sat by the window, her notebook resting in her lap. She had planned this retreat months earlier, every detail of the agenda, from the welcome dinner to the afternoon at the hot springs. Back then, she had expected to remain invisible, the quiet hand behind the curtain. Now she arrived with a different intention. She wasn't here to impress, not here to win Grant's attention or anyone else's. She was here to exist, to stand fully in her own space. No apology, no shrinking. Her outfit reflected that quiet decision. Wide-legged linen trousers, a soft cream blouse, her hair loose in gentle waves instead of tied back. Not dramatic, not loud, but it softened her face, and when she caught her reflection in the window's glare, she saw someone present. The Calistoga resort shimmered against the backdrop of volcanic hills. Pools of steaming mineral water glistened under cypress trees. Stone pathways curved between villas with wooden decks and climbing roses. The air smelled faintly of sulfur and pine, a blend both grounding and sharp. As the executives and their assistants filed into the reception hall, Claire walked with measured steps. She checked names against the list, helped distribute welcome packets, smiled politely at colleagues she usually saw only in passing. No one stared. A few murmured she looked different, but she didn't pause for their approval. Grant arrived later, his suit exchanged for a more casual blazer, his expression composed as always. His eyes swept the room, pausing briefly when they landed on Claire. It wasn't the dismissive glance of before, nor the sharp focus he reserved for deals. It was different, quieter, almost curious. But he moved on quickly, as though unwilling to examine what he had noticed. Claire registered it, then let it go. She was not here to orbit him. The first sessions unfolded smoothly. Strategy meetings in sunlit conference rooms, discussions about expansion, sustainability, branding. Claire took notes as she always did, but she also participated, offering brief comments when the moment warranted. Her words were calm, direct, and each time, the room shifted slightly. People listening, considering. At lunch, she found herself seated near Olivia Morton, the board advisor with silver hair and kind eyes. Olivia leaned toward her. "You seem more grounded here," she observed softly. "Retreats have a way of showing us who we are becoming." Claire smiled, a small acknowledgement. "Maybe," she said, but inside, she knew it was not the retreat. It was her. Among the guests was a well-known wine blogger, invited as part of the firm's new outreach strategy. His presence carried weight, his reviews could sway public perception. Claire noticed the way staff scrambled to accommodate him, how his eyes lingered critically on the smallest details, the timing of service, the crispness of linens, the temperature of the Chardonnay. At first, it seemed harmless. He typed into his phone often, pausing between bites of food, snapping discreet photos. But by the second day, murmurs spread. The blogger had complained about a delay in the spa schedule, Later, he mentioned in passing that the Wi-Fi in his villa had faltered, minor things, yet Claire felt them like clouds edging into a blue sky. She knew how quickly perception could sour, how a careless post could ripple into reputation. The thought nagged her, a whisper at the back of her mind. Something is brewing. Meanwhile, Grant carried himself with his usual control. He led panels, charmed investors, discussed vineyard yields with precise detail. But Claire noticed subtle differences. His gaze, when it flicked her way, no longer skimmed past as though she were glass. It lingered, not long, but long enough to acknowledge. Once, in the middle of a crowded reception, their eyes met across the room. He didn't look away immediately. His brow furrowed, as if he were trying to reconcile what he saw with what he thought he knew. Then someone tapped his shoulder, and the moment broke. Claire didn't dwell. She focused instead on her own presence standing straighter, speaking clearly, keeping her commitments to herself. The notebook she carried now held more than schedules. It held reflections, observations, small sketches of ideas for improving communication. By the second evening, the group gathered for dinner under strings of lights in the open courtyard. The food was elegant, the wine flowing, laughter rising above the clink of glasses. On the surface, it was perfect, yet Claire felt it again, that faint shadow, like a shift in wind before rain. A guest mentioned their room hadn't been cleaned on time. Another whispered about a billing error at the front desk. Each complaint, small, isolated, but together they unsettled the air. She tucked the knowledge away, her mind already mapping contingencies. The schedule announced that the following afternoon would be left open unstructured hours for guests to enjoy the mineral pools and gardens. Claire had planned it herself, believing people needed breathing space between strategy sessions. Now, she wondered if it would bring calm or expose cracks. As she walked back to her villa that night, lanterns lighting the path, she inhaled the cool air and let the weight of the day settle. Change was happening. Yes, within her and around her. But storms often began with whispers, and she could feel the whisper turning louder. Tomorrow would bring the open hours at the hot springs, a time meant for rest, but also a stage she could not predict. And something told her it would not remain quiet. When a woman claims her own space again, even the sky shifts its light. The afternoon sun hung low as guests drifted toward the hot spring pools. Steam curled upward in gentle ribbons, catching the golden glow. Cypress trees framed the stone paths, their branches swaying lightly in the breeze. Towels lay folded in neat stacks. Glasses of lemon water waited on small wooden tables. Claire walked slowly, her sandals tapping against the flagstones. She wore a white linen dress, airy and light, its sleeves brushing her wrists as she moved. Beneath it, she carried something she had never shown beyond the walls of her apartment, a simple black swimsuit, elegant in its restraint, chosen not to display but to affirm. Each step felt deliberate. She wasn't here to draw eyes. She was here to stop hiding from her own. At the edge of the pool, she paused. The chatter around her dimmed, though no one grew silent. The steam rose thicker near the water, blurring edges, making every movement softer. She lifted her hands to the buttons of her dress. One by one, she unfastened them, not slowly, not dramatically, just steady. When the last button slipped free, she let the dress fall into her hands, folded it neatly, and placed it on the lounge chair beside her. There she stood, shoulders straight, chin lifted, the black fabric tracing her form with dignity. Nothing gaudy, nothing begging, only a woman present, no longer retreating into corners. She stepped forward, the stone cool beneath her bare feet. The water shimmered, catching the sunlight in small shards. She lowered herself into the pool, the warmth embracing her instantly, steam swirling around her face. And in that moment, the air seemed to slow. Conversations dulled, time stretched. Across the deck, Grant froze. He had been mid-sentence with two investors, a glass of sparkling water in hand, when he caught sight of her. His words faltered, his jaw tightened. It wasn't beauty alone that arrested him. He had seen beauty before. It was something else in ease, a command, a presence he hadn't known she carried. For years she had been furniture to him, essential, reliable, but invisible. Now, standing in the water as though it belonged to her, she was undeniable. Grant's gaze lingered, unblinking. He felt an unsettling shift inside, as if the ground he stood on had tilted. Claire didn't look his way. She floated on her back, arms extended, hair spreading like dark silk across the water. Her face was serene, her breath steady. She was not performing. She was simply being. And that was enough to change the room. Around them, murmurs rippled. A few assistants whispered. Someone dropped a pair of sunglasses. Yet Claire noticed none of it. She felt the heat seep into her bones, loosening months of tension, melting the invisible armor she had worn so long. For the first time in years, she wasn't shrinking. She was expanding. The stillness didn't last. A phone buzzed sharply, then another, soon. A cluster of staff near the bar began whispering urgently, eyes fixed on their screens. The wine blogger had posted live from the retreat. His story showed the spa lobby, captioned with biting words, "Luxury or letdown service at Ashford's retreat stumbles hard." Within minutes, likes and comments piled up. A complaint about slow towels, another about billing errors. His tone was mocking, playful, but the damage was clear. Screens lit up across the pool deck as word spread. The PR team scrambled, their voices hushed but frantic. A manager rushed toward the lobby. Plans unraveled quietly in the background. Claire drifted to the edge of the pool, pulled herself out with calm grace, and reached for her towel. She wrapped it around her shoulders, the cotton soft against her skin, and moved toward the small service area. Without announcement, she began directing staff. She adjusted the rotation of attendants, ensured fresh towels reached every chair, reassigned one team member to monitor guest requests in real time. Her voice was low, calm, but decisive. No one questioned her. In the quiet storm, her composure became an anchor. The blogger, watching from the corner, noticed the sudden efficiency, the quick replenishing of drinks, the smoothing of small wrinkles in service. He posted again, softer this time, recovery in motion. Let's see how they handle the rest. Crisis contained, at least for the moment. And no one outside the staff realized who had steadied the wheel. Claire dried her hair, slipped her linen dress back on, and gathered her belongings. She walked past Grant, who still stood rooted by the bar, eyes tracking her. She did not stop, did not speak. Her silence carried more weight than any declaration. It said, "I exist with or without your gaze." Grant's throat tightened. He wanted to say something, anything, but words failed. She walked on, the sound of her sandals fading into the hum of conversation. And in her quiet leaving, she left behind an unshakable truth she no longer needed to be invisible. It isn't the chair that makes power. It's the way a person moves through a crowd. The morning after the poolside turbulence, the air at Calistoga carried a different charge. Conversations hummed with more ease. Laughter found its way back into the courtyards. The storm had not passed entirely, but its sharp edge had dulled. Guests who had frowned yesterday now sipped coffee more calmly. Reassured by a sense of order, returned. Claire blended into this current, not by disappearing, but by guiding it. She didn't announce what she had done, didn't linger near the staff she had quietly directed. She simply resumed her role, notebook in hand, eyes alert, movements measured, and yet her presence carried weight in ways it never had before. Olivia Morton sought her out first. The advisor's silver hair gleamed in the sunlight as she crossed the terrace, coffee cup balanced in her hand. She stopped beside Claire with the easy confidence of someone who had seen empires rise and fall. "I watched how you steadied things yesterday," Olivia said softly. Not many people could have done that without raising their voice. Claire felt warmth spread across her chest, though her expression remained modest. "I just tried to keep things moving." Olivia smiled knowingly. "That's leadership. Remember that." She touched Claire's arm lightly before moving on, leaving the words to settle. Not long after, a pair of department managers approached her with quiet questions. They wanted to know how she had organized the towel rotation so quickly, how she had managed to redirect staff without chaos. Claire explained in simple terms, nothing dramatic, just attentiveness, clarity, and trust. They listened carefully, nodding, jotting notes as if she were a mentor rather than a colleague in the shadows. The shift was subtle, but undeniable. Later, as the group moved into a panel on sustainability, Alex Rivers took the seat beside her. At 38, Alex carried himself with an ease that came from both intelligence and humility. His role as director of sustainability had made him a valuable partner for Ashford Vineyards. Yet, he spoke without pretense. "I heard you kept yesterday from sliding further," he said quietly, leaning just close enough for only her to hear. His tone carried no flattery, only respect. Claire lowered her eyes briefly. "It wasn't just me." "Maybe not," Alex replied, "but the right person at the right moment makes all the difference." "You have that." His words were steady, matter of fact. He returned his focus to the panel, but the acknowledgement lingered between them. For Claire, it was both unfamiliar and grounding. She had spent years working without anyone noticing her hand on the wheel. Now, people not only noticed, they sought her out. Across the room, Grant noticed too. He had entered the session late, his expression composed, his presence as commanding as always. Yet as he scanned the tables, his gaze snagged on the sight of Claire beside Alex, their heads inclined in quiet conversation. A ripple of something sharp moved through him. Not attraction alone, not even jealousy in the ordinary sense. It was the sting of recognition of realizing that someone had bloomed under his nose, and others had seen it before he did. He watched as Alex listened to her, truly listened, his expression intent. He saw the way Olivia gave her subtle nods of approval, the way staff leaned closer when she spoke. For the first time in years, Grant felt himself outside the circle, standing at the edge while the center of gravity shifted. Claire did not look his way. She wrote in her notebook, spoke briefly when needed, then listened with an attentiveness that made others lean toward her. There was no show, no performance, yet her quiet competence drew people as surely as sunlight pulls open a blossom. Grant shifted in his chair, unsettled. He was used to being the axis around which the room turned. Now, he watched that axis tilt, and it unsettled him more than he could admit. The rest of the afternoon unfolded in the same rhythm. Claire moved with steadiness, offering input when appropriate, coordinating small details others overlooked, and everywhere. Eyes followed not out of curiosity, but out of trust. By the time the last session ended, Grant's mind was taut with questions. How long had she carried this presence without him noticing? How many times had he dismissed her as furniture when she was, in truth, foundation? And why did it sting so deeply to see others recognize her worth when he had been blind to it for so long? That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, the group prepared for a small reception. Soft lights glowed against the stone walls of the courtyard, tables lined with glasses of wine and platters of local food. A gentle murmur of voices filled the air, easy and unhurried. Grant stood apart for a moment, his hand tightening around the stem of his glass. He knew he could not let the night pass without speaking to her. Words had to be said, words long overdue, because the balance of power had shifted, and it was time he admitted it. An apology is never enough if the gaze remains unchanged. Respect is how we stand still in the light of another. The reception had wound down. Plates cleared, glasses half full, left behind on linen-draped tables. A thin breeze moved through the courtyard, lifting strands of Claire's hair as she stepped away from the crowd. The stone walkway led to a quieter corner, a bench shadowed by climbing ivy. She welcomed the solitude, the chance to let the day settle. She had just opened her notebook when she heard footsteps. Steady, deliberate. She looked up to see Grant approaching, shoulders squared, but expression less certain than usual. "Claire," he began, his voice lower than the hum of voices behind them. She closed her notebook, resting her hands lightly on its cover. "Yes." He drew in a breath, as if preparing for a meeting with himself. "I owe you an apology, for words I said, for the way I didn't see." Her face remained calm. "An apology matters," she replied slowly, "but it's only the first step." He nodded, swallowing hard. "I know. I should have recognized you not just for efficiency, but for the structure you've built around me. I relied on it without thought. I dismissed it because it was invisible. That was arrogance." For a moment she let silence stretch, the night air cool between them. Then she spoke, voice even, deliberate. "Grant, I've done more than arrange calendars. I've carried messages across departments when tempers ran high. I've balanced competing priorities without letting one side feel neglected. I've filled gaps so your vision could stay polished. None of that shows on paper, but without it, things crack." He met her gaze, and for once didn't look away. "You're right. I didn't ask. I assumed the machine ran because it was designed well. I never thought to see the hands that kept it steady." Her tone softened, but only slightly. "That's the problem. You saw reliability, but not the person holding it together. Respect isn't words in passing. It's how you recognize value, even when it isn't dressed in noise." He exhaled slowly, shoulders lowering as though a weight pressed down. "I want to change that. I want to see you truly, not just as my assistant, as someone who deserves credit, who shapes more than I realized." Claire's expression did not shift into gratitude. She let the words hang, weighing them. "Change isn't a declaration," she said. "It's how you stand when the room doesn't demand it, how you listen when no one else is watching." Her clarity was sharp but not cruel. Each word was a marker, drawing a line in ground long left unmarked. Grant sat on the far end of the bench, leaving a respectful space. His hands were clasped, restless, as though he needed to tether himself. "You've been the quiet center of this company's rhythm," he admitted, "and I've been blind. I can't undo the past, but I can choose differently now." She studied him, then glanced at the night sky, stars faint behind the glow of courtyard lights. "I don't need validation," she said, "but I need to live where my voice matters. If that isn't possible here, I'll find it elsewhere." Her words were steady, like a key turning in a lock. He felt the impact, sharp and unrelenting. For years he had defined loyalty as service, never considering that loyalty could leave when unseen. His voice dropped. "Are you leaving? I haven't decided yet," she replied. "But I know my future can't be built on invisibility. If I stay, it has to be because respect exists in practice, not just in words whispered under ivy." The ivy rustled, as if the night itself had nodded. Grant leaned back, staring at the sky. "I've built an empire of stone and glass, yet I missed the foundation right beside me. That won't happen again." She rose from the bench, smoothing her dress. "Then prove it. Not to me with speeches, but to the way you lead, to the culture you shape." He looked up at her, eyes unguarded. "I will." She gave a small nod, neither acceptance nor dismissal, only acknowledgement. Then she turned back toward the courtyard, where laughter still flickered under lantern light. He remained seated, the echo of her words ringing deeper than any boardroom verdict. Respect wasn't his to claim, it was his to practice, moment by moment, and he knew, with unsettling certainty, that the future of his company, and perhaps of his own life, would shift on whether he learned that lesson. As Claire stepped into the glow of the courtyard, her thoughts carried elsewhere. A decision had been forming quietly, like vines twisting under soil. Tomorrow, it would surface. A decision about her work, her path, her own authority. One that would redraw the map of power at Ashford Vineyards. When a door opens wide enough inside the heart, the doors outside become little more than formality. The Monday after the retreat carried no fanfare. The office in St. Helena looked the same, vineyard hills visible beyond glass, the quiet hum of printers, the scent of oak polish along the hallways. Yet something had shifted, not in the air, but in Claire herself. She arrived on time, placed her bag beside her desk, and opened her laptop, as always. But behind the rhythm of her day lived a decision already set in motion. On Friday evening, before leaving Calistoga, she had drafted an application, not to another firm, not to escape entirely, but to step sideways into a space she had long observed yet never entered. Ashford Philanthropy Foundation, the branch that told the vineyard's stories through community partnerships, education programs, and cultural events. Independent from the daily operations Grant oversaw, directed by its own board, with Olivia Morton as a senior voice. The position Director of Community and Storytelling had opened quietly, posted on an internal portal few ever checked. The description spoke of weaving narratives, building bridges between vineyard and valley, shaping how the brand lived beyond its bottles. It was less about profit margins, more about presence and meaning. Claire had read the posting twice, heart steady, then uploaded her resume. In the cover letter, she wrote not of calendars or spreadsheets, but of coordination across divides, of crisis handled with grace, of unseen architecture that kept people aligned. She wrote of voices overlooked and stories waiting to be told. She pressed submit now. Days later, an email appeared in her inbox. Subject line application, received the next steps. She opened it slowly, eyes tracing the words. Her application had advanced. The committee wanted to schedule a first-round interview. She leaned back in her chair, letting the weight of it settle. It was not triumph she felt, but grounding, a quiet reminder that choices lived in her hands, not in anyone else's recognition. That afternoon, Olivia stopped by her desk, her presence as steady as ever. She set a folder down, then lowered her voice. "I saw your application." Claire blinked but didn't flinch. "I wasn't sure if it would be welcome." Olivia's eyes softened. "It's more than welcome. It's overdue. The foundation needs someone who knows how to listen between the lines, someone who sees detail without losing story. That's you." The words rested like sunlight on cool stone, warm, firm, undeniable. Later that week, Alex Rivers found her in the courtyard, papers in hand. He was preparing for a vineyard sustainability project, focused on water conservation. "I'd like you to weigh in," he said, offering her the folder. She raised a brow. "I'm not in sustainability." "You're in communication," Alex replied. "You bridge silos. You translate what's too technical into something people understand. That's as critical as the research itself." She accepted the folder, not out of obligation, but out of choice. The path was widening, branch by branch. Through it all, Claire carried herself with calm. She didn't announce her application, didn't mention Olivia's encouragement, didn't even tell Grant. She simply worked, adjusting schedules, sending summaries, moving pieces as needed. But beneath the surface ran a new current. Every task now carried the knowledge that she was not bound to this desk forever, that her worth was not measured by how quietly she blended, but by the clarity with which she chose. Grant noticed the steadiness, though he couldn't name its source. In meetings, he found himself watching her, her notes concise, her suggestions crisp. She did not seek his eye, did not wait for approval. She spoke when needed, then turned her attention back to others. The shift unsettled him, a reminder that loyalty could stand without leaning on him. For Claire, it was not about unsettling anyone. It was about alignment. The more she claimed her own space, the less she needed to shrink to fit into someone else's. One evening, back in her apartment, she opened the drawer where she had placed the rosewood lipstick weeks ago. She applied it before making tea, not because anyone would see, but because she could. She looked at her reflection, hair loose, eyes steady. She saw not invisibility, not shadow, but a woman moving toward her own horizon. Her phone buzzed with a calendar reminder. 2 weeks from now, the autumn gala in Napa, the vineyard's annual showcase. She would attend, as always, managing details in the background. But this year, something would be different. This year, she might be standing where the light reached her too. There are moments when no introduction is needed. The steadiness in your eyes is enough to make a room rise. The autumn gala filled the Napa event hall with the scent of pressed grapes, oak barrels, and late harvest flowers. Guests in tailored suits and silk dresses drifted between tables lined with vintage bottles and artisanal cheeses. Musicians played softly in the corner, their notes weaving through laughter and clinking glasses. For years, Claire had moved invisibly through this event, checking seating charts, adjusting lights, carrying programs. Tonight, she stood not at the edges but at the center, prepared to speak under the chandeliers. The foundation had asked her to present a new initiative, one she had quietly shaped for weeks, a storytelling program that honored vineyard workers, families, and the valley's broader community. It was not about marketing gloss, but about dignity, about naming the hands that touched the vines before the wine reached crystal glasses. When the host introduced her, there was a polite round of applause, no different from any other. Claire stepped forward, wearing a slate blue dress that caught the light without sparkle. Her voice, when it began, was steady. She spoke of dawn harvests, of workers bending over vines in the cool mist, of grandparents passing knowledge to children who now guided tractors and sorted grapes. She described not the product, but the people, their patience, their laughter, their endurance through summers of drought and winters of rain. The room stilled. Forks paused mid-air. Conversations hushed. Her words carried no theatrics, only lived truth. She did not read from notes. She told stories she had gathered herself, written in evenings when the valley slept. Stories of resilience, of belonging, of a community often unseen by those who toasted the wine it made possible. By the time she finished, the hall was silent in a way more powerful than applause. Then it began, first a scattering of claps, then a rising swell. Chairs pushed back, and one by one, donors, vintners, and longtime patrons rose to their feet. A standing ovation rolled through the hall, unforced, full of weight. Claire lowered her gaze briefly, then lifted it again, calm and grounded. She did not bow deeply, did not overplay humility. She simply stood, accepting the moment with grace. At the back of the hall, Grant remained seated for a heartbeat longer, eyes fixed on her. He had heard countless speeches, crafted talking points for investors, seen presentations polished to perfection, but this was something else. She wasn't performing, she was embodying, and for once, he did not reach to frame it, did not attempt to define or direct. He simply listened. It was humbling. He remembered the careless words he had once spoken, about distraction and invisibility. Now he saw how wrong they had been, not just because they were unkind, but because they had been blind. The applause continued. Claire stepped aside, giving space for the next speaker, but her presence lingered like light after sunset. People leaned toward her as she returned to her table, donors eager to shake her hand, younger staff inspired by what they had witnessed. Grant stayed where he was, hands still, his glass untouched. He felt something shift, deep and undeniable. Power had never truly been his alone. Respect could not be demanded by title. Tonight, it belonged to the one who had spoken from truth. Claire sat quietly among colleagues, accepting thanks with a modest smile, her posture unforced. She did not seek his glance. She did not need it. For him, that absence was louder than applause. Later, as the evening wound down and the hall emptied, Grant lingered at the back, watching her from a distance. He knew there was still something unsaid between them, something fragile but urgent. Respect first. Perhaps love after if it could be earned. But not tonight. Tonight was hers. Forgiveness is not a ticket back to how things were. Sometimes, it is simply the way you leave more gently. The week after the autumn gala carried a quiet clarity. Napa's hills turned golden with late harvest light, the air crisp, the mornings laced with fog. At her desk, Claire opened an email from the foundation. Her application had reached the final round. An interview with the full board was set for the following Monday. She sat still, fingers resting lightly on the keyboard. It wasn't surprise that filled her, it was confirmation. A steady knowing that the hours she had given, the choices she had made, had carried her here. This was not a gift, it was hers. That evening, As the office dimmed and staff trickled out, Grant appeared at her doorway. He was not in a tailored suit, only a gray sweater, his tie left behind. He looked less like the CEO of Ashford Vineyards and more like a man trying to lay down armor. "Do you have a moment?" he asked. Claire closed her laptop. "Yes." He stepped inside, leaning lightly against the frame. His voice was even, but softer than she had ever heard it. "I've been replaying things I said, things I failed to see. The truth is, I led with blinders on. I mistook control for clarity. I overlooked the very person who steadied me." She folded her hands. "And now," he let out a breath. "Now I know respect comes first. If I can't give that, I have no right to ask for anything more. Not in business, not in life." His eyes held hers, not demanding, not pleading, just present. Claire listened, her expression calm. "I've learned something too," she said. "Presence isn't granted, it's claimed. I spent too long waiting for someone to notice. I won't do that again." A silence stretched, not heavy, but clear. Two people standing in the same room, neither trying to fill the space with more than truth. Grant nodded slowly. "I don't ask for forgiveness as a pass, only as a chance to learn differently. If that means I walk beside you, I'd be grateful. If it means I watch you step forward without me, I'll accept it." Her breath caught faintly, though her face remained steady. She rose, moving toward the window. Outside, the vineyard rows stretched in neat lines, autumn light washing them in amber. "The choice is mine now," she said. "Yes," he answered. She turned back, her gaze steady, resolute. "Then understand this. My future won't be shaped by who fails to see me. It will be shaped by where my voice belongs, whether that's here or beyond. I'll decide." Grant lowered his eyes briefly, then lifted them again. "And I'll respect that. Whatever you choose." The moment hung between them, both fragile and strong. Days later, Claire stood at the foundation offices, waiting to step into her final interview, her portfolio tucked under her arm, her rosewood lipstick a quiet promise. She breathed in, slow and steady, the way she had learned on vineyard walks. Inside the boardroom, Olivia gave her a small nod of encouragement. Claire stepped forward, not as an assistant, not as an afterthought, but as a woman who had claimed her presence. Whatever the outcome, she had already crossed the line that mattered most. She had chosen herself, and far away, in his office overlooking the valley. Grant sat in stillness, not drafting notes, not calculating returns, just remembering her words. Respect first. Only then could anything else follow. The story did not close neatly, nor did it need to. Some paths run together, some part and meet again. The point was never who she would walk beside. The point was that she walked forward by her own decision. So, the question lingers. If someone who once ignored your light finally learns to see it, would you forgive and stay, or would you keep walking, stronger for having claimed yourself? Sometimes the deepest lesson in life is that being unseen does not mean being unworthy. For years, Claire hid behind efficiency, believing invisibility kept her safe. Many of us do the same. We shrink our voices, smooth our edges, and carry burdens quietly, hoping reliability will be enough. But safety without recognition can become a cage. Claire's journey reminds us that change does not always arrive in dramatic leaps. It begins with small acts of courage, choosing health, daring to speak, applying for the role you once thought was beyond you. Bit by bit, those choices build a presence no one can ignore. And when others finally see us, the real question is not whether they deserve forgiveness, but whether we are ready to honor ourselves first. Respect must come before love, dignity before loyalty. So, perhaps the lesson is this. You don't need permission to take up space in your own life. You don't need someone else's gaze to confirm your worth. Stand, speak, and choose because the light you carry was never theirs to grant. Thank you for spending your time with this story. If Claire's journey spoke to your heart, let us know by giving this video a like, sharing it with someone who needs encouragement, and subscribing to the channel for more stories of quiet strength, second chances, and the beauty of being truly seen. Your support means the world and keeps these stories alive.